Hello everyone and welcome to this overview of Single Touch Payroll preparing for launch with Sybiz VisiPay. Now this webinar is being recorded in March 2018, so take a lot of care in terms of the information as it may change between now and the launch of Single Touch Payroll on the 1st of July 2018. Now just to kick off, we're just going to cover a disclaimer. So as I mentioned, the requirements are still evolving and the associated information, etc., does need to be checked in terms of as we get closer to the July 2018 launch. And just in general terms, the material that we're providing today in this presentation and any comments we make, etc., are for general purposes only, and that you shouldn't consider any of this legal, accounting, HR, or tax advice. So any questions that you have of a legal or tax nature, etc., direct those to your advisors or the Australian Taxation Office. So what we'll be covering is we'll define what Single Touch Payroll is all about. It's also known as STP or STPR, Single Touch Payroll Reporting. So some of the accounting firms, we've seen some of the information coming out of those, they are referring to it as STPR, but as far as we're concerned, STP or Single Touch Payroll. And we'll talk a little bit about where it will and possibly may lead down the track, how to get ready for launch, the impact on your payroll process, what it means for the various stakeholders, so your employees, yourselves as employers, and also the government, and also encourage the employees to get on board with the MyGov website for their ATO interactions. And we'll cover a few questions at the end of the session as well. And we'll also have some more webinars coming up in May 2018. So what I'd advise is if you are watching this recording beyond May 2018, late May 2018, then certainly refer to the more recent recordings. As far as what STP is all about, so if you're used to doing the payroll process on an annual basis and having the payment summary annual report, then essentially Single Touch Payroll could be thought of in simple terms as doing the payment summary annual report every time that you pay. So one of the, advantages and benefits of Single Touch Payroll is you are transmitting a year-to-date balance each time that you process your pays. So that makes it easier in terms of if you do have modifications and adjustments, because you are always sending the cumulative balances for the year-to-date. It's much easier and much less hassle to do adjustments, etc., as time passes. And in a broader sense, it removes the annual administration associated with the payment summary annual report, but it replaces it with more admin on a pay-by-pay basis. So when you get to the end of the financial year, your first year of doing Single Touch Payroll, you would have spent more time on the payroll admin process, but on the upside, you won't have to do the payment summary annual report. Although there are some circumstances that you will need to do that, which we'll cover a little bit later on. And essentially the purpose of Single Touch Payroll is for more information to flow into the government, and it gives them more regular information. So at the moment, when you do your activity statements and you publicise, or rather report, your W1 and W2 balances, etc., and you pay your PAYG withholding, at no point during the course of the year do you let the ATO know which employees the PAYG is allocated to. So this will give the ATO more information through Single Touch Payroll, so they'll know who the PAYG is being allocated to, and also keep an eye on super compliance throughout the course of the year as well. So in terms of the commencement, it is kicking off on the 1st of July 2018 for substantial employers, and we'll define that in a moment. And then legislation is still before Parliament that it is looking like virtually every other employer will be kicking off on the 1st of July 2019. So it is seemingly inevitable for every employer. Now, just a little bit of jargon, you may see some of these terms throughout the course of your interactions with the ATO, etc., in the lead up to the launch of Single Touch Payroll, but BMS is an acronym meaning Business Management Software, and for these purposes you can think of it as payroll software or Sybiz VisiPay. And another new bit of lingo that you may not have heard of is your DSP, which is your digital service provider. And again, you can think of that as a payroll software company. So in this instance, Sybiz. So a little bit of jargon to get used to. This is an image that the ATO has been using to explain the landscape of how Single Touch Payroll works, and you'll see in the top left hand corner here we've got the BMS acronym all ready for us, and so that's the payroll software that you're using. You then report the information through to the ATO. Your super funds will be reporting information through to the ATO as well, and then your employees will be able to see certain information through the MyGov surface as well. So that's I guess an overview visually as to the how STP will work. Now, how it will evolve is that we already know that TFN declarations and possibly super choice nominations will be part of the Single Touch Payroll reporting process down the track, and also BAS pre-fill. So that's not the entire BAS, that is your W1 and W2 boxes. They can be pre-filled by the same information that you're now transmitting through Single Touch Payroll. And there is a real possibility of an expansion of the information collected through Single Touch Payroll as time passes. So we would really hope that, unlike we have seen recently with the working holiday makers, that there won't be any changes made partway through a financial year. That was very disruptive and annoying for all concerned when the working holiday maker legislation came through. And so we are certainly hoping that any changes and expansion of that information will be kept to a minimum and also confined to the end of financial year. But there's no guarantees there, unfortunately. And possibly down the track we may see payment integration. So part of the original concept and design was perhaps to get the PAYG withholding paid as part of the Single Touch Payroll reporting process, and that's certainly been softened since the process has been evolving, but down the track that may be re-engaged into the process, and essentially that could have cash flow implications for various businesses out there. And we have in recent years seen SuperStream come into play as well, and there is a possibility of some convergence so that it is, I guess, more single touch in terms of a more streamlined reporting, but that's just merely speculation. And I guess with the benefit of hindsight, it may have been good to hold off on SuperStream for another couple of years and just roll that into STP from the get-go, but that's not the case. And there's also the possibility of more of this type of reporting creeping into other areas of the business as well. So in Fiji, for example, they've just launched legislation where virtually every business, when they process a sales invoice, will need to basically get that ratified by their tax office, and even to the extent of making sure that their GST equivalent calculations are correct before the invoice can actually be dispatched. So that is the way the world is evolving. Now, you should have received some information from the ATO from around about the beginning of March, and this is just an example of a checklist that you would have hopefully received. And because we are your software providers, I thought it'd be a good idea just to sort of talk a little bit about our items on the checklist here. And certainly Sybiz is very much intending to provide you an STP service, and so the tick can go in that first tick box. And the deferred start date, what that is we as a software developer could apply to the ATO to say, hey, look, we don't think we'll be ready in time for the 1st of July 2018. We'd like to piggyback all of our clients along with a deferral, and that's certainly not something that we are looking to do, and based on the current information it's not something that we will be doing. But as I said in the intro, we are shooting a moving target, so just take that with a little asterisk there, that we are not intending to get a deferred start date. And in terms of the transition, this is part of it. There's not a lot to it, as you'll see as we go through the presentation. It's not very disruptive for your processes. It's just, I guess, the purpose is to have the awareness as to what it is and get that understanding. And there's really not a lot that you'll need to change in terms of your payday processes, so we'll make that a bit clearer in just a moment as well. And certainly, as the ATO suggests, we do encourage you to subscribe to our communications, and we have a monthly newsletter that you can sign up to. You can go to sybiz.com/subscribe and fill out your details there, and we'll put you on our newsletter subscription list. And we could have interim publications coming out. As I said, it's a monthly newsletter, but with the importance of Single Touch Payroll, there may be some more frequent information coming out toward the end of the financial year. And we'll do that all again next year for the smaller businesses as they transition to Single Touch Payroll as well. And certainly the ATO is a good place to go for more information as well, and they have their microato.gov.au/STP, and certainly keep an eye on that, bookmark it. And also an advantage there is that at the bottom of each of those pages on the ATO, they've got a last updated date, so you can find out very quickly and easily whether things have changed since your last visit. And certainly follow the ATO on the various social media links as well. And just the checklist over the page to review your business processes. There's, I guess, just the main thing that I'd want to point out is that your employee information will need to get a bit of a looking at, and I guess in some respects this is something that could ordinarily wait until the end of financial year, because certain information wasn't mandated in the payroll package until you got to the end of financial year process. And so what that means, and we'll talk about this in a bit more information, is that you will need to make sure that you've got accurate information, including the names, addresses and date of birth records of your employees. And as I mentioned, Sybiz itself isn't looking for a deferral, but you as a business, you may have some complexities that are, I guess, above and beyond the normal business. And in that, if that's the case and you do need more time, there is a deferral process which currently at this point hasn't been published on the ATO's website, but they are setting an expectation that it will be there by the end of March 2018. So keep an eye out for that if you do need a deferral. But just a note on that. A deferral isn't you just apply for it and off you go, you get it. You do need to justify the reasonings for not only getting the deferral, but also what steps you're putting in place to plan for and implement STP within your business. And as far as Sybiz VisiPay is concerned, there is now available an upgrade to Sybiz VisiPay 17.10. Now this is, I guess, a preparatory upgrade in the lead up to STP, and there will be a further update before the 1st of July 2018, which will actually switch on the STP functionality. So when you install version 17.10, just you will need to basically complete and correct some of your data. So one of the big changes under STP compared to the payment summary annual report is the categorization of allowances. So when you upgrade to 17.10, we will set all of your allowances to be a category of other, and we'll talk a little bit more in the coming slides as to the other options for you there. As I said as well, you will need to get the address information complete for your employees, and there's a few other bits of housekeeping that you'll need to look at as well. Another aspect of the lead up to STP is that you will, with respect to the 1st of April 2018, is you will need to perform a head count. Now that is actually Easter Sunday, so you don't need to go into the office and call everyone in. It's just basically a reference point, reference date that you use in order to complete your head count, and we'll talk a bit more about that in a moment as well. And because the nature of the information is changing in terms of what you need to basically get right and get complete from that first pay, so it's not just about getting the employee's name and bank details and paying them now, you're going to need to get their date of birth and their address details as well as part of that initial onboarding procedure. And we will have, as I said, have some more webinars toward the end of May. And certainly if you are watching this webinar now beyond the end of May, then please refer to those more recent webinars. And as I said, we will have another upgrade coming out prior to the end of the financial year to version 17.20, and that will also enable a sign-up process for you to register for the STP service that is being provided through Sybiz VisiPay. So once you've upgraded to 17.10, you can go to Options and Tax Details, and you can toggle on and off whether you're active with Single Touch Payroll. A BMS ID will be created. That's neither here nor there. That's just a unique reference so that the ATO knows that if you are reporting from multiple payroll databases under the same ABN and business name, that will give the ATO the distinction between the different databases that you're reporting from. The contact information is basically who do you want the ATO to contact in the event they need to communicate to you about anything you've reported through Single Touch Payroll. And just before I move on from this slide, I'd just like to point out that you do need to take control of this active flag. You can turn it on ahead of the 1st of July 2018. You won't be doing anything under STP before that. But because of deferrals and even in some cases exemptions that may be granted, or perhaps a larger employer will become smaller and gain an exemption for the first year, that is in your control to tick that on and off as to whether you're active under Single Touch Payroll. So it's not something that just happens automatically behind the scenes, because there are exceptions that Sybiz know nothing about with respect to your own circumstances. The allowance categorization, as I said, we will flag them all as other when you upgrade to 1710, so apologies for those of you that have hundreds of allowances. That will be a bit of a chore to go through and recategorize as appropriate. So the idea is that you have the 5 specific allowance categories, and where there is a reasonable match between the allowances that you have in your system and those categories, then you flag those categories to match the allowance that you have in the system. If there is no match, you can flag it as other. That's still a legitimate value there, but certainly there's a little bit of housekeeping required to get those right. And some of you may have noticed that pretty much matches the work-related deduction categories within the individual tax returns in Australia. Now, as I said, also you're going to need to complete and make sure your employee records are also correct. And so certain things like address details that weren't mandated previously, you will need to have them there prior to doing any Single Touch Payroll reporting for that employee. Now, one of the reasons for that is you could have a new employee who's actually new to employment in general, and when they join, they haven't yet got a TFN. So they go through that application process, they use a placeholder TFN. So by having the employee name, address, and date of birth details correct and complete, what that enables the ATO to do is that once that employee gets their proper TFN and you update your system, the next time that you submit an STP record for that employee, then the ATO will be able to do a bit of a smart match there and go, hey, yep, this is the same person, so let's just merge the records that have previously been reported with the new tax file number, and it'll be a fairly unobtrusive process for you. So it's a good incentive to get that information right from the get-go. And we have had occasions where people have had employees for months on ends and then got to the end of a quarter and had to do their superannuation payments for those employees and realised they didn't have the super details, and not only that, they didn't have any address information or contact numbers or email addresses for those employees. Of course, they had the BSB and account numbers to pay those employees, and obviously they knew who they were by name, but they had no other way of contacting them. So that's another good reason to refine your onboarding processes to make sure that you get the complete and correct information from the get-go. As I mentioned a few slides back, there is this self-assessment as to whether you are a substantial employer, and that may seem like you need quite a number of employees. You might be thinking 100, 200 employees, but that's certainly not the case. It's actually 20 employees is the line in the sand as to whether you are a substantial employer. So if you have a headcount of 20 or more employees as at the 1st of April, then you will be deemed a substantial employer. Now, there's nothing you need to do. It's basically an inferred opt-in to say, yep, I'm a substantial employer, therefore I will need to start reporting under Single Touch Payroll by the 1st of July 2018. Now, there is a little bit of confusion about whether company directors are counted, and hopefully there's a bit more clarity on the ATO's website as we get a bit closer to the 1st of April 2018. But there's essentially a distinction between if they are non-executive directors, so if they're not working in the business on a day-to-day basis, then generally they're not counted. But people like myself who are a director of Sybiz, but I also work there on a daily basis, I'm an executive director, and therefore I'm included in that head count. So some people will say if you are doing PAYG withholding from your directors, then they would be included in the head count. So that's just, again, generalisation. You may want to get your own advice on that, but certainly that is cause for a little bit of confusion. And you are counting it's a head count, not a full-time equivalent. So you're looking at your casual, part-time and full-time workers. And just a bit more clarity, this is again something that has been received from the Australian Taxation Office. So you are counting your full-time, part-time and casual employees, and those casuals, if they're on your payroll as at the 1st of April and they worked any time during March, then they're included in your head count. So, and again, just reiterating that point about the company directors, you'll see on the right hand side here it says don't include company directors, but that's not always going to be the case, as I said previously. And if I guess you do that inferred opt-in on the 1st of April and things drastically change and your headcount, say, drops to 15, then you will still need to apply to the ATO for an exemption from reporting in that first year under Single Touch Payroll. So it's not an automatic thing. You will need to apply for that. Now, as far as reporting through STP is concerned, when you're ready to submit, it's really quite easy, and this is really where the Single Touch comes into it. So we're still working on exactly what that process will be, but essentially what will happen is you'll get through the end of the pay process and do your checks and balances, any corrections that you need, and then once you're happy to submit, you'll just basically flick a switch and that will happen automatically in the background. It'll be very unobtrusive and the information will flow through to the ATO. And Sybiz is using a third-party service for that process, and that is a secure service that will transmit that data on your behalf. And I guess the big key benefit of that is that if the ATO site's down for whatever reason, then the retrying will happen as part of this service. So if the servers come back online at 2 o'clock in the morning, you don't have to be sitting there at your computer retrying. That all happens in the background as part of using this service. So good positive there. And just another couple bits of lingo. Basically what you do is you report pay events to the ATO. Now this happens behind the scenes, so you may not see that terminology, but I'm just mentioning it now in case you do come across it. There's update events, so if you want to change some information between your different pay events, you can submit update events. And again, that's pretty much under the radar. You won't see that. As far as the notifications are concerned, that there is a 72-hour service level that the ATO have asked for in order to provide information back to the employers upon submission of the Single Touch Payroll information to them. So for those of you in a role that payroll is just one of the hats that you wear throughout the course of the week, fortnight or month, and then you move on to other things in the business, unfortunately, that means that you will need to keep your payroll hat on for a little bit longer and keep an ear to the ground just for those notifications to come through as part of Single Touch Payroll reporting. Another bit of lingo is the final event indicators. Now these are important and I guess I'm just pointing them out sort of informally now, but they will come into play toward the end of June 2019 when you're preparing for the end of financial year under Single Touch Payroll. So the final event indicators are essentially a mechanism where you say to the ATO, I have finished with this employee's financial record for the year, and that will then give the ATO the green light to basically do the tax return pre-filling that comes about as part of Single Touch Payroll reporting. So that's quite important as we get to the end of the 2018-19 financial year, but we'll talk a bit more about that in just a moment. And just in the interest of transparency, we are still trying to work out exactly the fee structure associated with using Sybiz VisiPay for Single Touch Payroll reporting, and so there will be a fee associated with that. Essentially, between the ATO and the industry, there's been tens of millions of dollars spent on the systems to enable Single Touch Payroll reporting, and that's a cost that does need to be passed on to the customers. So that's what we'll be doing, and it's not going to be a prohibitive cost. It's going to be in the cents per employee per pay, but we also need to work out equitable ways of dealing with the larger employers with thousands of employees on a weekly basis. So just wanting to be upfront about that. And as far as the impact on the payroll process is concerned, it's really not going to be that much different for you on a pay-by-pay basis. But what it means though is, as I said, you're going to want to get more information when you're onboarding your employees, and really try and get that started now, even in the lead up to Single Touch Payroll. Start getting that process in place where you are collecting better information by the time you pay that the new employee their first pay. And there are going to be some time pressures. So what that means is that if you say come in the morning and you process the pays and do your checks and balances and reporting and get the bank file ready to send to the bank, then you are going to need to be under a little bit more pressure just to sort of make sure that you got everything right before sending off the information to the ATO through Single Touch Payroll reporting. So that may be a little bit different, and certainly when we're going from a regime of having to do a report once per year, some 6 weeks after the end of financial year, to being in a position where you're essentially having to report every time that you pay someone, it's quite a different realm to enter into as far as those time pressures are concerned. And I guess just in terms of the lingo associated with when to report, it is your STP reporting needs to occur on or before the date of payment. So if, for example, you came in and processed pays on a Monday, but you didn't release that payment to the bank until Wednesday to pay your employees, then that gives you a little bit more breathing space where you can do those checks and balances and not be under so much pressure before submitting the information to the ATO. So in that case where you're processing the pays on a Monday but releasing them on a Wednesday, you can report on the Monday, Tuesday or Wednesday and still conform with that on or before the date of payment requirement. And as I mentioned previously, the ATO has that 72-hour service level for their responses, and so it is important to keep an ear to the ground. And we would hope that as technology improves and the processes improve, that we will see a greater frequency of, or a greater response time from the ATO as time passes. And I guess another thing just to point out is the ATO infrastructure reliability. There have been some issues in recent years and it has been quite disruptive for those that interact with the ATO, and it is just one of those realities at the moment where it's a big concern in the lead up to STP to be aware that there are those issues. And as I said, because we are using a service, that try again is happening as part of that service, so it's not something that you need to really worry yourselves with. And then that BAS pre-fill, the W1 and W2 boxes being pre-filled from the Single Touch Payroll data, that's not going to be a feature from day one. At this stage it may be sort of 6-12 months down the track, but it's certainly going to be coming, and just something to be aware of. And I guess just because it is pre-filled doesn't mean it's 100% accurate. There may be issues in terms of you correcting some data which hasn't flowed through the STP process by the time you fetch your BAS. So just use it as a guide, but still make sure you do your own checks and balances on that pre-filled information. Now, as far as the stakeholder benefits are concerned, from a government point of view, it's going to ensure greater compliance in your reporting and also the revenue going through to the public coffers. And there's going to be enhanced data matching, which seems like a big brother sort of overbearing thing, but there are positives associated with that in terms of there's been a recent term bandied around called robo-debt, where certain people have been contacted by Centrelink saying that they owe money, etc. And that could just be because there's been some changes of circumstances partway through a year that people have just been caught up in the day-to-day. They've neglected to let the various government departments know that their circumstances have changed, and then being left with a horrible debt down the track when the data matching happens on an annual basis. So one of the advantages of Single Touch Payroll reporting, because of its frequency, if there is a significant change in circumstances, the government agencies will exchange that information and then get preventative measures put in place a lot quicker, and come and tap you on the shoulder to say, hey, look, it looks like your pay's gone right through the roof. You may no longer be entitled to this benefit that you've been receiving. Let's have a bit of a talk and find out what's going on. So that is definitely a positive there. From your employees' point of view, there's going to be better information coming through from the super funds into MyGov, and they will be able to see their year-to-date earnings and tax figures as well through the MyGov website. There's going to be more pre-filling of their tax return data, which will make tax time that little bit easier as well. And no more payment summaries, which is going to be, I guess, quite disconcerting for some employees who've been receiving them for decades and probably still call them group certificates. And there's nothing to stop you still issuing payment summaries to your employees if they want that security blanket. And some employers I've heard say that they're going to probably do it for another 3 years and just wean people off them gradually. And from an employer's point of view, there is no longer the annual reporting requirement, although there's another asterisk next to that as well. In terms of a few slides back, you heard me mention the final event indicator. So in the first few years, there's going to be a transition as to when you need to do that final event indicator by. But if you miss that deadline, then you will still need to do payment summary annual reporting processes as well. So you'll still need to submit your MDUPE file from your payment summary annual report process from VisiPay through the ATO business portal if you don't do the final event indicator. Now, I should just mention there as well, one thing that I anticipate will catch some people out is that if they, say, have a casual employee on the books at the start of the financial year and then they're not engaging the service of that casual employee for a while, so they're still on the books, they haven't been terminated, but at the end of the financial year, they still need to do a final event indicator for that employee, even though they haven't been paid for, say, 11 months of the financial year and they've just got paid in July. So that is something that, again, will be more significant as we get to the end of that first year under Single Touch Payroll. And there is, I guess, when the original launch of STP came out in the press, the politicians were saying it's going to reduce the red tape and overall compliance costs for business in Australia. And that's really sort of fallen away from the rhetoric since then. And certainly the reality is when all is done and dusted, it is most likely going to cost you more time to be compliant through Single Touch Payroll compared to the current process. And certainly looking at the UK, who've implemented a very similar process a few years back, the overall compliance cost for businesses has increased. There have been some issues there as well, which we hope won't be repeated in Australia in terms of some of the data just hasn't gone into the right buckets and there's been some conflict as a result of that. And certainly because the touch points, so we're going from an annual reporting process to a every single pay run process, because those touch points have increased, it does increase the amount of data points to be queried by the tax office, and that's certainly again the case as what's happened in the UK. So we're not alone in Australia, we're not the trailblazers, the UK have beat us to it, but we've got New Zealand and the Republic of Ireland also coming online in the next 12 months or so with a very similar process as well. So it is the way the world is heading. And as far as MyGov's concerned, the ATO has asked us to ask you to ask your employees to join MyGov. So there's over 11 million MyGov accounts already active in Australia. And that's not to say that they're linked to the ATO. The MyGov process that allows you to link in various government agencies. We did a little survey here at Sybiz, and around about 90% of our employees do have a MyGov account, and most of them have the ATO linked in. So I guess we're above average in that respect, but certainly it is something that, as I said, the ATO would like you to encourage your employees to get on board with that as well. And the bottom right hand corner here is just a little screen mock-up. This may be totally different to what will eventually come through to the MyGov site for the employees, but it gives them a summary on a year-to-date basis as the income and tax that's been withheld from each of their employers. So that's just a little snapshot there. And there have been some queries coming through to Sybiz about the differences between the information you'll get in Sybiz VisiPay Employee Self-Service versus MyGov. So certainly there's going to be year-to-date earnings and PAYG and super information coming through to MyGov, but some of you have asked whether payslips will go there. That's certainly not looking likely, and stranger things have happened a few years down the track. That may be the case, and similarly things like leave balances, etc. Aren't likely to be in MyGov, but could be down the track. So there's a lot more functionality in Sybiz VisiPay, ESS or Employee Self-Service. So where to go to get more information? Obviously the ATO, so ato.gov.au/STP. Your external advisors. So just as a sidebar, one of the accounting publications in Australia conducted a survey just before the end of 2017 to ask the industry, the accounting industry, the accounting firms, as to how prepared they were to help their clients with STP, and around 10% said that they were ready to rock. A recent rehash of that survey, that's gone up to 25%, so it's still the minority of accounting firms feel that they're ready to assist their clients through that process. And yeah, so certainly keep an eye out for the information coming from your external accountants, etc., because that's sure to ramp up in coming months. As I said, you can subscribe to our newsletters and other information feeds as well. So sybiz.com/subscribe, and it only takes you a couple seconds. So if you're in doubt as to whether you've signed up previously, do it again, and the worst thing that will happen is you'll lose 5 seconds of time. You'll certainly only still receive one copy of the newsletter. And just in terms of, I guess, our experience with various things that have happened over the years with the introduction of GST in the early 2000s, the recent introduction of SuperStream and working holiday makers even closer, there is some misinformation that floats around. People don't quite know what it is they're talking about. So do check those things. If you do receive contradictory information or you get information from an unreliable source, then please check that with the Australian Taxation Office or your external advisors. And a sad fact in this day and age as well is that the scam emails will probably be out in force as part of the I guess the changeover to STP. There's going to be a little bit of panic no matter how well we're prepared as employers. There's still going to be a bit of panic when we cut across, and that makes us vulnerable to urgent unsolicited emails coming from fraudulent sources. So keep an eye out for that scam kind of information coming through. And certainly back when I showed you in the options screen in Sybiz VisiPay, when you can put an email address in there, if it's at all possible, ask your system administrators or external IT people if they can create a new email address for you to use for STP purposes, and that will make you less vulnerable to those scams. And in terms of some of the questions that came through in the registration process for these webinars, some people asked whether they can just do a month-to-date report and email that through to the ATO, or do an EMP dupe every month and email that through to the ATO instead of using the STP reporting. The short answer is no. You do need to use the proper reporting process. If an employee doesn't yet have a TFN when they join you, as I said, that's the reason to get those address details and date of birth, etc. right from the get-go, and then that allows the data matching to happen when the proper TFN gets delivered to that employee and you start reporting with that TFN. If you do have a defect in the information, or let's just say for example that employee between joining you and applying for a TFN and getting their TFN actually change address, then the ATO may still come back to you and say, look, we just want to check same name, same date of birth, but different address. Are they one and the same person? So that's what happens there. Company directors, again, that could be confusing, but if they are employed in the business on a day-to-day basis, then yes, they should be included in that employee count. If you have less than 20 employees, can you start from the 1st of July 2018 and not wait for that legislation to pass and sit it out for 12 months? Yes, you certainly can, and we would encourage you to do so. Or even if you don't want to do it from the get-go, you can start at any stage during that 2018-19 financial year and be a pro before it becomes compulsory for you. And I should just distinguish between that and the substantial employers. We don't encourage anyone to start using STP with Sybiz VisiPay prior to the 1st of July 2018. In fact, we won't even enable it. And the reason for that, and it may contradict some of the advice that you get from the ATO where they say if your payroll software is ready early, why not get on board before the 1st of July? We'd like other people to be the guinea pigs for that, and as I said, the reliability of the ATO servers, etc., that's the main reason why we want other people to go through that process, and hopefully by the time we get around to the 1st of July 2018, it'll be all systems go, and there won't be any additional pain that's required to be incurred there. Can you still give someone a payment summary? Of course you can, and there's nothing stopping you from doing that, and some people will probably demand it. You don't have to give them a payment summary, but I guess there's no harm in doing so. And under what circumstances do I have to report through both STP and payment summary annual reporting? As I said, if you don't do those final event indicators for all of your employees by the cutoff dates, which will slide back over the first 3 years of STP, then you will also need to do payment summary annual reports as well. Again, that's probably neither here nor there at this stage of the game, still 15 months out from the end of the first financial year under STP, but yeah, certainly we'll reinforce that point as we get to that point in time. The information that employees will be able to see on MyGov, it is really just the year-to-date earnings and year-to-date tax, so they won't be able to see the breakdown at this point in time. That could change, but at the moment it is just that real high-level stuff. And then obviously once you do your final event indicator, that will then release the information through to the tax return pre-fill, and your employees will be able to see greater detail through that process as well. And this is a question that was asked in a session that we attended recently, where one poor employer basically decides who they're employing on a daily basis, and at the end of the day they pay them, and they do that every day of the year. And they asked, do I need to report through STP every single day? And the short answer is yes, because you're paying people on a daily basis, you will need to do STP reporting on a daily basis. So hopefully that's not too many people. If you start reporting under STP, can you stop if your headcount drops? The answer to that is yes, but it's not an automatic thing. You will need to apply for that. And you may want to just question yourself as to if it is becoming inevitable within 12 months, then why stop reporting? It's probably easier just to continue, but that's your own decision to make. But just bear in mind that there will be a process that you'll need to go through with the ATO, even though you don't need to notify them that you're opting in the first instance. You will need to apply to opt out. So that's just something to keep in mind. We have talked about whether people can access their pay slips and leave balances through MyGov. That's certainly not going to be the case at the outset, and unlikely in the passing of time, so it's a good idea to have a look at Sybiz VisiPay ESS if you're not already using that. And the final question that we'll cover is, I won't be ready, can I get a deferral? And the answer to that is yes. And apart from telling you that it's not just a fait accompli, you don't just say, I want a deferral, and the ATO says, yep, here you go, no worries. You do need to justify the reasons for the deferral. So the ATO will want to know things like, how many employees do you have? What kind of complexity is it that leads you to want a deferral? And a few other bits and pieces, but that will become clearer toward the end of March when that information is published by the ATO. So just in closing, the next STP webinars, we will be notifying those dates in the April customer newsletter from Sybiz, and again, feel free to subscribe to that. And we'll go into a bit more terminology and let you know a bit of the lingo in the context of some of the concepts as well. So we'll cover the straightforward, so just the vanilla, I've processed my pays, I've paid my employees, I'm hitting the button, what's the experience? And then we'll go into some more complex scenarios, including corrections, things like reportable fringe benefits, which are reported annually at this point in time and don't really fit into the construct of a pay-by-pay basis, but there are ways that they have been catered for in Single Touch Payroll. And as I said, we'll walk through the experiences and let you know what to expect. And there'll be a whole lot more, and I can't probably tell you too much more because we are still shooting a moving target, and some of those decisions we're still waiting for that to come through in terms of some of the things like the type of information that the ATO will communicate with you about. So for example, if you are reporting on a weekly basis, the ATO might sort of look and see that it's been 10 days since you submitted your last report under STP, and they'll get in contact with you and try and find out why that might be the case. But again, that's still a little bit up in the air at this point in time. So the best thing to do is subscribe to the newsletter and keep an eye out for those next round of webinars and sign up for those when available. So with that, I thank you for your time and wish you all the best. Thanks again. Bye for now.